Hey everybody, my name is Michael Gianangeli, and I'm pleased to introduce Blake and Brandon Payne, who will be talking about advanced training techniques. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. How you doing? Thanks for coming. My name is Brandon Payne, owner of Accelerate Basketball, and we're here today to kind of talk about some of the advanced things we're doing with Stephen Curry and how we're integrating technology into a philosophy that we've been working on for the past 8 or 9 years. So if it wasn't for Stephen, we wouldn't be here, so I want to make sure that I give a thanks to him for putting us in this position. So we'll go ahead and go to that now. We're going to talk a lot about how Steph went from being this 165-pound guy at Davidson to becoming, you're not working here, to becoming the 2-time MVP of the NBA. And so much of that was through his physical hard work and his mental work, but also through his understanding and his acceptance of technology and his wanting to learn more about how technology and assessing and testing and retesting can help us grade improvement. And sometimes it's difficult with NBA players, especially guys that are maybe a little bit older, a little bit further on in the league, to get them to understand the importance and how you can integrate this into what they do. So Stephen's been a great model for this because he's all for it. Being out in the Bay Area, being close to Silicon Valley, of course, helps. But the fact that he's so willing and so excited about new technology in our workouts has really made a big difference for us. When we started this company back in 2008, 2009, we wanted to put together a progressive training model, systematic, organized, and progressive training model. And then when we were putting it together, we did not have all this technology. All we had was players, some weights, basketball, a few physical tools that helped us get to where we wanted to be at that time. What we've done is we've slowly integrated into this 10-point philosophy that we've put together. We've integrated specific technology pieces into the philosophical points to take advantage of those, to make them the most effective they can be, okay? A little bit about me, though, and as we're getting into this, I'll kind of explain how I started to come up with this. I was about as mediocre gets as a player. I could shoot the ball a little bit. I was a coach's son, so I knew a little bit about the game, but when it came to me playing against guys that had physical superiority over me, I struggled. And I loved the game, and I wanted to figure out a way to get that guys like me could eventually compete against guys that are physically better than them. And, part of it selfishly is I realized that I would probably have sons that would have my genetic makeup, so I wanted to make sure I had something in place for those guys so they didn't get, they don't get yelled at the way I did by my father. So mediocre player, I became a low-level Division II college basketball coach. And back then, we didn't have a big budget. So the guy that was the lowest guy on the roster as far as coaches took on a lot of different responsibilities. You had 4-man workouts, which is your skill development workouts. I was the strength guy as well as a basketball guy. I was the guy, believe it or not, we had tape exchange. The younger folks in here won't even know what tape exchange is. That's when we actually had to mail a letter to another school requesting VHS tapes to be sent to us, and we would send them back. That's how, I gave away my age there a little bit. But I knew at that time, while going through all that, seeing all the things that we were asking players to do, okay? Asking them to go to study hall, asking them to go to class, asking them to work out, asking them to lift, asking them to play pickup. Then they got to eat. Then they got to live a little bit. I knew there was a more efficient way to put all this together and condense their workload to get the most out of it. So what we did is we started toying around with the idea of how can we blend strength and conditioning with skill development and come up with a better model. And I started toying around with light loading versus heavy overloading, and started coming up with some pretty interesting things in terms of using light loading to increase skill level by going through very specific ranges of motion with the light loading attached. But so all this leads up to us trying to bridge the gap, and I talked about it, about how my crazy mediocrity led me to this point as a player. So we talk about player A versus player B, and there's a lot of Stefan involved in this because Stefan doesn't like talking about it, but the reality is this. If we lined everybody up in the NBA and we were doing basically a combine, an NFL-style combine, Stefan wouldn't be at the top of the list in terms of explosive athletes. He's a good athlete. He's certainly an NBA athlete, but he's not a Russell Westbrook athlete. There's not many guys that are. But you have to compete, and not only compete with, but you have to beat Russell Westbrook. So we had to come up with ways to bridge this gap, okay? And so we put players in a couple different categories. For the purpose of this, we talk about player A versus player B. Player A, obviously not as physically gifted, has to be more willing to learn. And I think that's a big part of player development now. Is your player, is your athlete willing to take the time to learn about his body, to learn about his process, and then take the information that he's learned and actually absorb it and put it into play? It's harder than you think. It's harder than you think when you get players at that level that are like, I'm in the NBA, I've done pretty well. You have to convince them it's not about getting to the NBA, it's about staying in the NBA. And it's about succeeding there, okay? So player A, again, more detailed, more efficient, and he's got to continue to progress. And I think that's probably one of the bigger things with Stefan is he understands that even after 2 MVPs, one of them unanimous, that he has to continue to progress. And, this summer, this past offseason, when we were working, getting ready for the season, I didn't think we could possibly get any better in terms of development than we did the previous summer, and I was wrong. Even after the unanimous MVP, we had a better offseason than we did the previous offseason. And to me, that was crazy because I knew all the things that went into creating that MVP season. I knew this year with the change in the roster that, the numbers wouldn't show because, you're adding Kevin Durant. It's a pretty good guy to add, and you're going to get him his touches, okay? So you got to continue to progress. Player B, they have no rules. They're guys that don't necessarily have to pay that close attention to these types of things. So bridging the gap, now we go back to it. We're going to talk about training efficiently, and this is where the technology piece starts to come into play. Now, technology is great, and it's done a lot of really good things for us. But we have to remember that it's the player that's doing the work. You can't rely so heavily when you're in player development on technology that you get away from the guy that's doing the work, okay? You also have to be careful not to overload them. You can do too much, and they'll shut you down. They'll shut it out. So what we're using it for, and you see right there with the iPad, mostly brain activation. We're trying to get the brain and the body to connect to get ready to go for the workouts, okay? We do that with a lot of stuff where he's handling the ball and looking at something, whether it be an iPad, whether it be FitLight technology. We have a lot of different things that we use. And that's going to be, once we get his brain turned on, he's going to be able to learn things a little bit quicker, be more efficient with his learning, okay? And it's going to help us, again, to build a better basketball player. Now, scalability, because obviously, while working with Stephen Curry is great and working with NBA players is great, the reality is, they're at the end of the line as basketball players. And, as people that are a part of basketball at a high level, I've always felt like we have a responsibility to the game to leave the game in a better position than we found it when we got to it. So I wanted to make sure that whatever we built and put together was scalable from the age of 3 and 4 all the way up to an NBA player, all right? So the same philosophy, the same elements of this philosophy, we're going to go into it in a few minutes, they are applied with my son's workouts, with our 4-year-old's workouts, just like they're applied with Steph's workouts. The drills, the speed, the implementation of the drills, of course, is going to be different because the skill levels and the physical abilities are different. But the elements that are present have to be the same. Have to be the same. And you're going to see a video here. You're going to see Draymond Green on one side, and you're going to see my 8-year-old on the other side. And they're doing a drill that some folks have been a little critical of, but that's because they don't quite understand what we're doing here. A lot of people see these tennis ball drills like this, and they're thinking that this is a ball handling drill, okay? Because it looks like a ball handling drill. You're dribbling the ball, you're tossing a tennis ball. That's not what we're doing. We're training systems of the body to perform in a more efficient manner. What we're looking at here is I'm not even looking at the basketball first. The first thing we're looking at is the player's mouth. Is the overload of the tennis ball and the basketball so great that the player forgets to breathe? That's the first thing you'll notice, is when you overload a player, they will stop breathing. And we explain to them, if you're doing that on this stationary tennis ball drill, when you're trying to make a move in a game, guess what you're doing? You're holding your breath. And it's not going to get you on one end, it's going to get you on the other end when you play defense. You've got to breathe when you play this game. The second thing we're looking at the functional strength of the body, okay, and the structural integrity of the body. A lot of players, not only does it affect them mentally, and you see their mouth doing all kinds of different things, but you'll see their shoulders start to rock back and forth, which means they're not activating their core, they're not staying tight. The overload is so great at that time that they can't even activate their core correctly. The final thing I'm looking at is knees, okay? If you see a player, and we see it all the time, doing this drill, and their knees start to buckle together, the overload has affected their strength. It's affected their ability to pay close attention to their structural strength, okay? So this isn't even a drill. This is an assessment that we do at the end of every time we activate a player. We put them through this assessment. Because if any of these things are present, I know that the brain and body connection hasn't been made well enough for them to learn at an accelerated level that day, okay? It's called Accelerate Basketball because it's an accelerated model of learning. It's an accelerated model of player development. And it's not there right there. And just for the record, that was the first time Draymond had ever done that drill. He looked ridiculous. But he got a lot better. And he's an all-star, so he's great. Next thing. So another thing we wanted to do, because when we first got into the NBA, we worked with some guys that were at the tail end of their career. You know, time is undefeated. We're going to lose steps. We're going to lose power. We're going to lose explosion. It's just the way it is. We feel and we know that we can offset that by making you a more efficient player, a more efficient mover, a better decision maker that makes decisions quicker by training your brain, okay? Everybody has a ceiling physically. We know that, okay? So our goal as trainers is to get each player operating at their physical peak, their ceiling, okay? But to be good in the NBA, everybody operates there. We have to be able to use your brain to operate past your ceiling, and that's what we're trying to do, okay? The fun stuff, the philosophy. Okay, there's 10 points to this. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can, but these are the things that are present in every workout, whether it's a 30-minute workout, a 90-minute workout, a 2-hour workout. These things all have to be present, okay? And when you're dealing with NBA guys, if there's any NBA people here, you know that some days you think you're getting 90 minutes, you're only getting 30. So you got to squeeze everything in pretty quick. Physical activation. So we go through an extended process individually, and it's individually based, to get each player ready, okay? Before the past 18 months or so, we did this pretty much technology-free. But since NeuroHalo has released their product, and we've read the literature on it, and it's It looks pretty good. It helps with focus, okay? It stimulates the brain, helps with skill acquisition. We have now added that element of technology to our physical activation, okay? So again, all this stuff has been developed without the idea of technology. We're just adding technology in because it can be seamlessly added. Something like NeuroHalo is just a set of headphones. It doesn't take any time to set up. We don't have to stop to get it on. We just hand it to them, they put it on, and we go. The next element is our neuromuscular activation. So this goes straight into learning. How are we going to learn things quickly, okay? And having a very efficient neuromuscular system with the body being able to communicate very efficiently is going to help that because we're going to do a lot of things at one time, okay? Go ahead. So with this, you'll see, you get it again? A lot of things going on in this next video if it's going to pop up. Maybe not. Hurt your feelings there. Huh? Blake put this presentation together, so if it doesn't work properly, he's going to be very upset. But what you're going to see when we get into neuromuscular efficiency, you're going to see the same type of drills with the tennis balls, okay? But it was going to include some other things. So I think a lot of people see snippets of what we do, these 10-second clips that either get put in an article or they're on social media or whatever, and they think that all we do is use tools and use different things. The reality is those are just small pieces. You know, so you've seen them wear this mask, this oxygen mask. We use that for a very specific reason, and it's not to condition him. We use that to get him in a winded state without him moving very much. We don't want him moving a lot in the off season because we don't want to put any additional stress on his body. So what the mask does is it allows us to do stationary drills. It puts him in a winded position so that his brain is getting ready to be in a game state of mind, okay? With that, we overload him completely. Multiple tennis balls being thrown at him while he's doing different drills. He goes through overloaded 2-ball drills where one ball is a game ball, one ball is a heavy ball. He's got to handle those loads at the same speed the whole time. It's very difficult stuff to do. He makes things look easy. If you've ever seen him do his pregame with 2 balls and all that stuff, that's not easy. And he flies through it, but it's because he's trained himself to be able to handle these loads. And it's him doing it, okay? So next is where we go from our neuromuscular activation. We've got to have that in place, and then we go to cognitive development. Now, cognitive development is where we're going to talk a lot about decision-making, okay? Because we've got to be able to make quick and accurate decisions. But we can't train in patterns, okay? We have to stay away from patterns. So we use things like the FitLight technology. The FitLight technology, do we have a video of that? Is that going to work? Probably not? Okay. So you see Sierra Burdick, the WNBA player in that picture. You see that she's got this light disc in front of her, okay? There's typically 4 light discs, and they're going to flash different colors. Sometimes 1 will flash, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Each color represents an assignment, okay? That assignment, day to day, that color can change. So if one day we say green is a crossover, so it's a crossover knockout. Red, if it flashes red, you got to go between your legs, knock it out. Blue means go behind your back, knock it out. It sounds simple when you're explaining it, but when you're there and all of a sudden all 3 colors flash at one time and you've got to try to do it, we've had players literally freeze and not know what to do because it was such an overload. So we use this for several things. The biggest thing, again, is decision making. But when we get into our conditioning, this is how we grade conditioning, okay? We use that tool to grade it. Move on to the next. So what you're seeing here is Steph with sound. Steph using just an iPad. So it's a brain game. That's on the cognitive side. So we give him different assignments. So he's got to go behind his back, between his legs. He's got to move all around, and he's doing different brain games while the oxygen is being taken out of his body. And we move on. With everything we do in every drill, whether technology is present or not, we have 3 elements of movement that we have to train and pay close attention to. This is where video becomes very important to us. Our acceleration, deceleration, and dynamic stability. Those are the 3 elements that are present in every move we make on the floor. And we have to train those 3 elements to allow him to be as balanced as he can be and to be a dynamic scorer. So we do that. We use a lot of overload and contrast, which we'll talk about later. But we're working in very specific movements. So we'll overload a 1 dribble pull-up by using load, pulling him forward, making him decelerate. We'll overload a 1 dribble pull-up in the other direction for a first step explosion going up into a shot. So there's a lot of different things we can do with that, but we have to have that present. So in every drill we do, that will be present. Whether it's a shooting drill, a ball handling drill, or a game simulation, that's going to be present, okay? Performance capacity, probably the most important part of our off-season workouts is performance capacity development. This is where we're kind of redefining conditioning the way that we see it versus the way it's been done for a while. In the past, we've always talked about having conditioning tests to pass. You hear about it in the NFL. Some NBA teams, I think, still use some conditioning tests that every player has to pass before they can start training camp. We don't really think along those lines anymore because it's not the guy who can play the hardest for 48 minutes. It's the guy that can play the smartest for 48 minutes. It's the guy that can make the same decision at the same speed at minute 48 as he did at minute 1. So how we do that is we do a game simulation, and our players absolutely love it when we say it's time to start doing quarters. I get some things thrown at us. So we use stuff like this to get them initial scores and baseline testing with these drills. So what you're seeing Stephen do there is as he passed that first light, he broke a beam, 2 additional lights popped up behind him, and that's giving him information. That's telling him, do I shoot a 2 or a 3? So that's the first light. The second light is telling him, well, what move do I make getting into the light? What move do I make to get the shot off? That's the second light. To make this more difficult, we close the gap. So right there, I think you started about 14 feet prior to decision. Then we take it about to 10 feet, and then we get it to 6 feet. Okay, but we're getting baseline scores here because this is before we start quarters. So we're getting scores, accurate decision making, and did he make the shot? He'll then go through 1 quarter of simulation. Okay? A quarter of simulation takes about 5 minutes, and that's playing offense and defense. He's changing ends of the floor. It's constant movement, no fouls, no dead balls. He does not stop. We'll then come back to that same set of drills that we did prior to the first quarter, and we'll compare the times. Because he's winded, because he's tired, is there a difference in the times and the scores? We'll then do it again for a second quarter, and a third quarter, and a fourth quarter. And by the end of the offseason, we will know if he's ready to play 82 games if his fourth quarter scores match his pre-game scores. If he's making the same decisions at the same speed when he's fully fatigued as he did when he's fresh, we know he's ready to go. So that's how we define conditioning. I don't really care if he can run at a certain speed. That doesn't matter at this point. We're more concerned about decision-making, reading, and reacting correctly. Overload and contrast, that's a big part of what we do. That's not really so much technology-based unless you're using accelerometers and things like that to see how quickly the bar is moving or how quickly he's getting up off the mat. We use Vertimax, different bands, heavy balls, things like that, to teach new movements, to overload the movement, and the player learns it pretty quickly from that point on. Okay? High volume reps at game speed, maintaining perfect mechanics. For a guy like Stephen, this is probably where he really stands out. So the technology that we use on this is going to be, number one, the video. Because as he's going through a workout, we have to see the video to see, are there any mechanical breakdowns? Is anything happening in his shot as he gets more tired, okay, to make us take a closer look at it. The second thing, and we just acquired this past off season, is the NOAA Shot Analyzer. The NOAA has been a great tool for us. It's an amazing tool that we use because we can see where each shot is taken from. We can see the arc of the shot. We can see how deep the ball went into the basket. Okay, we have all these different metrics we can look at on his shot to, again, tell, is fatigue affecting what he's doing on the floor? Because we can't have that. We've got to be ready to play for 48 minutes if he needs to, for 82 games a year, plus they're going to be making some pretty deep playoff runs for a while, okay? The next thing we'll talk about is multiple tasks, okay? So every drill, whether technology is involved or not, has to have multiple layers of benefits. And this is where the intelligence level of your player comes into play, okay? Your players, if he understands his body, he understands what you're trying to accomplish within each drill, he's going to be more detailed. And the more detailed they are, the greater the benefit of each drill is going to be, okay? So we talked about all the things in that one assessment drill. We're talking about, are you breathing? Is your core tight? Are your knees in the right place? Is the ball moving at the right speed? Okay, are you able to, catch the tennis ball while you're dribbling? So those are the types of things that, while they look like they're kind of outside the box and they're kind of different, they're really not. It's really feedback. It's really assessments, okay, telling us if that player is ready to go, if that player is ready to learn that day. On-court strength of performance. Again, this is where we're going to get into really specific movements, specific things that we learn. At the end of every season, Steph has a list of things, and I have a list of things. Some of them are skilled, but most of them are things that happen physically on the floor, such as things that teams started doing defensively against them. Maybe teams had success being physical with them in a certain way, okay? So we talk about that, and then we come up with drills, and we come up with movements to make sure that if he sees that again, okay, it won't affect him in the same way. So we want to make teams work harder to try to figure out ways to stop him so they can't just keep going back to the same things. So we'll come up with strength stuff using medicine balls, using actually other trainers, different ways to hit him, different ways to bump him within his drills that essentially act as strength work. It's strength because he's having to work pretty hard to get from place to place. And then the final part of this is systematic muscle confusion and keeping the player engaged. So we stay away from patterns. We have a certain number of movements we like for them to go through in terms of their strength, but we don't do it very patterned. We do it in a way to where the player, it feels like they're constantly reacting to it, but we can still test it, and we can still assess whether or not we are making the progress that we need to make with that particular player. With him, it's really not hard, okay? He might be one of the strongest players, pound for pound, that we've ever come across. He's amazingly strong. And I don't think he gets quite enough credit for that. But there's nothing that we have asked him to do in the weight room that he has not accomplished. There's nothing that we've asked him to do on the floor with overload that he hasn't accomplished. So he's incredibly competitive, and his will to get better is unmatched. So that's pretty much it for us. There's our contact. We've got about a minute if there's a question or two or anything like that. Anybody wants to ask anything? Because if not, we got to get off to the airport. Okay, thanks a lot.